A pristine backyard. The sun glints off the turquoise water of a swimming pool. A woman, Karen, stands at the edge, her face a mask of entitlement. Across from her, another woman, Sarah, holds a sledgehammer, its head glistening with a dark, wet sheen. The sound of a siren wails in the distance, growing louder. The camera zooms in on Sarah's determined eyes, then pans to the gaping, jagged hole where the pool's drain used to be. Water, stained with a mix of concrete dust and something darker, gushes out, turning the vibrant green lawn into a muddy, churning wasteland. The first time Karen's kids came over, Sarah had been working in her garden, the sweet scent of honeysuckle, a welcome distraction from the relentless summer heat. A piercing shriek cut through the quiet afternoon. Two small boys, no older than 6 or 7, were splashing in her pool, their laughter a cacophony of joyful defiance. Sarah, wiping sweat from her brow with a dirt-caked glove, felt a familiar wave of unease. Her backyard, her sanctuary, had been invaded. Her new neighbor, Karen, had moved in 3 weeks ago. Their interactions had been brief and cordial, a few. Polite nods over the shared fence line, an exchange of hellos that felt more like a formality than a genuine greeting. Sarah had a strict, no trespassing policy. Her pool was her private refuge, a place where she could escape the pressures of her demanding job and the lingering grief of her husband's death. It was a place for silent reflection, not raucous play. Sarah walked to the fence, her heart pounding with a mixture of annoyance and a growing sense of violation. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice firmer than she intended. The boys didn't seem to hear her. They were too engrossed in their game, a chaotic battle of splashes and shouts. "Excuse me," she repeated, louder this time. The back door of the house next door opened, and Karen emerged, a tall glass of iced tea in her hand. She wore a wide, saccharine smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, hello, Sarah. Aren't they just having a ball?" Sarah took a deep breath, trying to keep her tone even. "They are. But they're in my pool." Karen's smile didn't falter. "Oh, don't be a worrywart. Boys will be boys. It's too hot to keep them cooped up inside." "I understand that," Sarah said, the politeness in her voice beginning to fray. "But this is my private property. I'd appreciate it if you'd keep your children on your side of the fence." Karen took a leisurely sip of her tea. "They're not hurting anything. The pool water will be fine. Besides, they're just so cute, aren't they? Look at them. Little angels." Sarah looked at the little angels who were now trying to see who could make the biggest splash, sending waves of chlorinated water onto her meticulously manicured lawn. "Cute or not, they need to get out." Karen sighed, a sound of theatrical exasperation. "Honestly, Sarah, you're being a little dramatic. It's just a pool. We'll all be neighbors for a long time. Let's not start off on the wrong foot. Shall we?" "This isn't about being a neighbor," Sarah insisted, her voice rising. "This is about respecting boundaries." Karen finally set her glass down and walked toward the fence. "Boys, time to go." The boys, however, ignored her. They were too busy playing Marco Polo, their high-pitched calls echoing through the yard. "See?" Karen said with a shrug. "They're not listening. Kids, right?" She gave a little laugh, as if this was all just a charming quirk of childhood. Sarah felt a vein throb in her temple. This wasn't a quirk. It was a deliberate dismissal of her authority, a blatant act of disrespect. She walked around the fence line to the pool deck, her footsteps echoing on the stone. "You need to get out of my pool, now!" The boys froze, their wide eyes fixed on her. They saw the seriousness in her face, the unwavering resolve. Slowly, they clambered out, dripping water all over the deck. As they trudged toward the fence, Karen called out, "Say thank you to Sarah for letting you use her pool." The boys muttered something inaudible, and Karen's smile returned. "See? All good. No harm done. We'll be over again soon," she chirped, and then disappeared back into her house. Sarah stood there, staring at the wet footprints and the disturbed water. She felt a profound sense of powerlessness. Karen hadn't apologized. She had asserted her own version of reality. "We'll be over again soon." The words hung in the air like a threat. The next time was 2 days later. The boys were back. This time with a raft shaped like a shark. Sarah was on a video conference call, a crucial presentation for her company, and the sound of the children's laughter and shouts bled into her microphone. Her boss, a humorless man named Mr. Henderson, paused mid-sentence. "Is that a pool party, Sarah?" She fumbled with her mute button, her face hot with mortification. "No, sir. My neighbor's children are in my pool. I'm so sorry." "You need to handle that," he said, his voice flat. "This is unprofessional." She ended the call, her presentation in shambles. She marched outside, her anger a cold, hard knot in her stomach. Karen was sitting in a lounge chair on her own patio, scrolling through her phone, a serene expression on her face. She didn't even look up when Sarah walked to the fence. "Karen," Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Your children are in my pool again." Karen looked up, feigning surprise. "Oh, are they? I didn't notice." "They are, and this is the second time. I asked you to keep them out." Karen sighed, putting her phone down. "Sarah, we talked about this. They're kids. They're just having fun. You're being a real buzzkill." "This isn't a community pool," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "This is my home. I work hard to have this, and I need you to respect my property." "I do respect it," Karen said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I think you just need to learn to relax. You're wound so tight." "I'm not wound tight. I'm angry. This is disrespectful, and it's a liability. What if one of them gets hurt?" Karen waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, they won't get hurt. They're good swimmers. And I'm watching them, see? They're perfectly safe." "You're not watching them. You're on your phone," Sarah shot back. "And even if you were, I am the one who would be liable. My insurance policy wouldn't cover an accident involving uninvited guests." Karen's face hardened. "You think I'm going to sue you? Really? That's what you think of me? What a neighborly thing to say." "I think that your lack of respect for my boundaries is going to lead to a problem. Get them out, now. This time." The boys emerged from the pool without being told, sensing the tension in the air. Karen stood up, her composure finally cracking. "You know what? Fine. We'll stay out of your precious pool. Happy now?" she sneered. Sarah didn't answer. She just stood there, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, watching Karen and her children retreat. The victory felt hollow. She had won the battle, but she knew the war wasn't over. The next few days were a tense ceasefire. Sarah installed a new, more secure lock on her backyard gate, but she knew that wouldn't stop them. The fence was low, and the children were agile. Karen, meanwhile, began a campaign of subtle retaliation. She would let her dog, a small, yappy terrier, bark relentlessly at all hours. She would have loud, late-night parties that bled into Sarah's quiet evenings. Sarah tried to ignore it all, to rise above the pettiness, but the constant intrusions chipped away at her peace of mind. Then, one Saturday morning, Sarah was enjoying her first cup of coffee on the back patio when she saw something float past her window, a red plastic ball. A minute later, a second ball, then a child's floaty. She rushed to the window and looked out. The sight that greeted her made her blood run cold. Karen's kids were in her pool again, but this time they weren't just swimming. They had brought with them a dozen brightly colored water guns, and they were having a chaotic, unsupervised battle. One of the boys, emboldened by a sugar rush from the box of sugary cereal he had balanced precariously on the side of the pool, climbed up on the diving board, his legs wobbly. He looked down, aiming his water gun at his brother in the water. Below, Sarah ran outside, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Get out of the pool!" she yelled, her voice a raw, desperate cry. She looked over at Karen's yard. Karen was sitting on her patio, her back to Sarah's house, scrolling on her phone, a pair of oversized headphones on her head. She was oblivious. The boy on the diving board, startled by Sarah's voice, lost his footing. He teetered for a moment, his arms windmilling wildly in the air, and then fell, not into the water, but onto the edge of the concrete deck, his head hitting the unforgiving surface with a sickening thud. The other boy screamed. Sarah didn't hesitate. She vaulted the low fence, ignoring the stinging pain as a splinter embedded itself in her palm. She reached the boy in a split second, her professional training as a trauma nurse kicking in. He was unconscious, a thin line of blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. "Call an ambulance!" Sarah screamed at the other child, who was frozen in terror. "Now!" She knelt down, her hands gently but expertly checking his pulse and airway. She felt a profound dread, the weight of responsibility crashing down on her. This was it. The moment she had feared. Suddenly, Karen was there, her face a mask of furious indignation. She had taken off her headphones and was staring not at her injured child, but at Sarah, who was kneeling over him. "What have you done to my son?" Karen shrieked, her voice a high-pitched wail of rage. She lunged forward, pushing Sarah away from the unconscious boy. "You pushed him. I saw you. You pushed my child." Sarah, stunned and off balance, stumbled back, her hands still. A pristine backyard. The sun glints off the turquoise water of a swimming pool. A woman, Karen, stands at the edge, her face a mask of entitlement. Across from her, another woman, Sarah, holds a sledgehammer, its head glistening with a dark, wet sheen. The sound of a siren wails in the distance, growing louder. The camera zooms in on Sarah's determined eyes, then pans to the gaping, jagged hole where the pool's drain used to be. Water, stained with a mix of concrete dust and something darker, gushes out, turning the vibrant green lawn into a muddy, churning wasteland. The next day, a deep, unnerving silence hung over the neighborhood. The police had come and gone, their questions as sharp and cold as the air around them. Sarah had told them everything, the trespassing, the repeated warnings, the heartbreaking accident. Karen, however, had painted a different picture, a lurid tale of an unhinged neighbor who, in a fit of rage, had pushed her innocent child. The officers, seeing a distraught mother and a woman whose hands were still stained with dried blood, took both sides with a wary impartiality, but the look in their eyes told Sarah everything she needed to know. They saw her as a potential suspect, a cold and detached woman who had let her anger get the better of her. Her lawyer, a friend of her late husband's named David, had been clear. "It's her word against yours, Sarah, and she's got a compelling story. A child is in the hospital. The optics are not in your favor." The hospital itself was an ordeal. Sarah, in her professional capacity as a trauma nurse, knew the signs. She knew the sterile smell, the quiet urgency, the hushed voices of doctors and nurses. But this time, she was not the healer. She was the accused. Karen had made sure of that. When Sarah had tried to visit the boy, the nursing staff, under strict instructions, had turned her away. "The family has requested that you stay away. Ma'am." Karen had launched a full-scale campaign of emotional warfare. She posted on the neighborhood's social media group, a community forum that Sarah had always found mundane. Now, it was a battleground. "My beautiful little boy is in the ICU because of our neighbor's cruelty. She's not just a bad neighbor, she's a monster. Please pray for my family." The comments section was a torrent of outrage and sympathy. "I'm so sorry, Karen. What a horrible thing to happen. I always thought she was a bit strange. She never said hello. They should put her in jail. A child? That's just sick." Sarah felt her world collapsing in on itself. She was a pariah, a villain in a story she hadn't written. The doorbell rang with reporters, and the phone rang with hateful, anonymous calls. Her once peaceful home had become a fortress, a place where she felt trapped and misunderstood. Her boss, Mr. Henderson, called her into his office. "Sarah, I'm putting you on paid leave, indefinitely. The hospital can't afford to have this kind of publicity. It's affecting our reputation." He looked at her with a pity that felt colder than anger. "I'm sorry. I hope you can get this sorted out." Sarah walked out, her professional life, the one thing she had built for herself after her husband's death, gone. She felt a profound emptiness, a cold void where her sense of purpose used to be. She was a woman who had given her life to caring for others, and now she was being accused of harming a child. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in her mouth. The boy's father, a man Sarah had only seen in passing, an imposing figure with a perpetually tired expression, finally showed up. He knocked on her door, his face a mask of weary anger. "I just want to know what happened, Sarah," he said, his voice low and rumbling. "I need to hear it from you." Sarah, her nerves frayed and her heart heavy with grief for what her life had become, told him the truth. She recounted the warnings, the repeated violations of her property, the moment of the fall. She spoke of her training, of her immediate instinct to help, of Karen's furious accusation. He listened, his expression unreadable. When she was done, he just shook his head. "Karen says you pushed him, that you hate children, that you're just a bitter, lonely woman who couldn't stand to see a family happy." The words were a physical blow. "That's not true. I saved his life. I stabilized him until the ambulance came." He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I don't know who to believe. All I know is that my son is in the hospital with a concussion, and he remembers you yelling at him right before he fell." Sarah's heart sank. She had yelled. She had been angry. The boy's memory, a child's fragmented and frightened recollection, would be enough to confirm Karen's story. The truth was becoming a casualty, lost in a storm of emotion and prejudice. Later that week, Karen's lawyer sent a letter. It was a formal, cold document, a prelude to a lawsuit, negligence, child endangerment. The claim was for millions of dollars, a sum that would bankrupt Sarah and destroy what little she had left. Karen wasn't just trying to win, she was trying to annihilate her. Sarah sat in her backyard, the same yard that had once been her sanctuary, and stared at the pool. It looked different now, a place of shame and danger. The water, a perfect turquoise, seemed to mock her. It was the centerpiece of her downfall, the locus of her misery. She felt a cold, hard resolve form inside her. She wasn't going to let this woman take everything from her. She wasn't going to stand by and watch her life be destroyed by a lie. She called David, her lawyer, her voice firm and steady. "What are my options? What can I do to protect myself?" David's advice was grim. "You can settle, give her a good amount of money, and maybe she'll back off. Or you can fight, but it's going to be a long, ugly battle, and the public opinion is already against you." Sarah thought about the endless cycle of trespassing, the constant disrespect, the brazen disregard for her home and her peace. She thought about her husband's face, a gentle reminder of the life she had lost, and the peace she had been trying to hold on to. She thought about Karen's smug, triumphant smile, the look of a woman who had won. She made a decision, a cold, calculated plan born of desperation and righteous fury. It was a plan that went against everything she was, everything she had been trained to be. It was a plan that was ugly and final. The next morning, she went to the hardware store. She bought a sledgehammer, a heavy, blunt instrument of destruction. She also bought a large, industrial-sized tarp and several bags of quick-drying cement. The cashier, a friendly old man, gave her a curious look. "Big project you got there, ma'am?" "Something like that," Sarah said, her voice devoid of emotion. She spent the day working. She drained the pool, a long, tedious process. The water, a symbol of so much strife, gurgled down the drain, leaving behind a grimy, empty basin. The sight of the empty pool, once a thing of beauty, was now a hollow, soulless pit. She put on her work gloves, the same ones she had worn in her garden, and began. The first swing of the sledgehammer was clumsy, a jarring shock that rattled her teeth. But the second swing was better, more focused. The head of the sledgehammer connected with the pool's concrete lining, sending a spray of white dust into the air. The sound was a loud, satisfying crack. She worked for hours, a woman, possessed. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the sledgehammer against the concrete was the only sound in the silent backyard. She wasn't just destroying the pool. She was destroying the symbol of her grief, the monument to her loss. She was destroying the thing that had brought Karen into her life, the thing that had become a weapon in her neighbor's hands. By the time the sun began to set, the pool was a gaping, jagged hole. Water from the last remaining crevices was seeping into the ground, mixing with the concrete dust and turning the grass into a muddy, churning wasteland. Sarah, exhausted and covered in sweat and grime, stood at the edge of the pit she had created. She looked at her work, the jagged, broken pieces of a life she had once cherished, and she felt a strange, chilling sense of triumph. Just then, she heard a sound from the backyard next door. A child's voice. The boy had been discharged from the hospital. He was home, and he was standing on his patio, staring in wide-eyed horror at the gaping wound that had once been her pool. Karen walked out, a look of smug satisfaction on her face, and saw the destruction. The smile on her face vanished, replaced by a look of unadulterated shock and fury. She looked from her son's face to the desolate wasteland in Sarah's yard, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and rage. Sarah, seeing the look on Karen's face, a look of a person who had finally been defeated, felt a powerful beat of satisfaction, a small sliver of justice in a world that had gone so wrong. A pristine backyard. The sun glints off the turquoise water of a swimming pool. A woman, Karen, stands at the edge, her face a mask of entitlement. Across from her, another woman, Sarah, holds a sledgehammer, its head glistening with a dark, wet sheen. The sound of a siren wails in the distance, growing louder. The camera zooms in on Sarah's determined eyes, then pans to the gaping, jagged hole where the pool's drain used to be. Water, stained with a mix of concrete dust and something darker, gushes out, turning the vibrant green lawn into a muddy, churning wasteland. Karen stood at the fence line, a statue of shock and incandescent rage. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. She just stared at the gaping, jagged crater that had once been Sarah's pool, a symbol of their bitter, escalating feud. The boy, her son, now with a neat bandage over his forehead, was beside her, his face a mixture of fear and confusion. He pointed a trembling finger at the muddy pit. "Mommy, what happened to the pool?" The question seemed to break the spell. Karen's eyes, filled with a primal fury, snapped from the destruction to Sarah, who stood amidst the rubble, a silent sentinel of her own making. The sledgehammer lay at her feet, a testament to her cold, deliberate act of destruction. "What have you done?" Karen finally shrieked, the sound sharp enough to shatter glass. Sarah didn't answer. She just looked at her, her expression unreadable, a wall of quiet defiance. "Are you crazy? You destroyed your own pool!" Karen screamed, her voice rising in pitch. "You maniac! You pushed my son and now you're doing this? What is wrong with you?" "It was never my pool, Karen," Sarah said, her voice low and steady, her words cutting through the evening air like a shard of ice. "It was a liability, a weapon you were using against me, and now it's gone." Karen, however, didn't seem to hear her. She was already on her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. "I'm calling the police. Again, this is harassment. This is vandalism. You've destroyed property. You've gone completely insane." Sarah just watched her, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Let her call the police, she thought. Let her tell them I vandalized my own property. It was a ridiculous accusation, a final desperate grasp at control, and Sarah felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. The police arrived less than an hour later. 2 different officers this time, a young woman with a skeptical look and an older man, who seemed weary of the entire neighborhood's drama. Karen, a master of performance, was in full victim mode, her voice trembling with manufactured tears as she recounted the unprovoked act of aggression. "She's out of control, officer." Karen sobbed, pointing a dramatic finger at Sarah. "First she pushes my son, then she does this. She's a danger to this community." The young officer, Officer Davis, looked at the mud-filled pit and then back at Karen, a slight frown on her face. "Ma'am, it's her property. She can do with it what she wants." "But it's a hazard," Karen insisted. "My kids could fall in there. It's a giant hole in the ground." "Then I suggest you keep your children out of her yard," the older officer said, his tone dry and final. "Especially now. The last thing we need is another incident." Karen's face, a second ago filled with feigned sorrow, twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She had lost. Her power play had failed. The police, the final arbiters of their conflict, had sided with Sarah's cold, calculated logic. The next few weeks were a strange, uneasy peace. The mud pit remained, a constant, ugly reminder of the war that had been waged. Sarah began the slow, backbreaking work of filling it in, a process that was both physically and emotionally draining. Every shovelful of dirt felt like she was burying the past, burying her grief, and burying the memory of the pool that had been the centerpiece of her once happy life. The lawsuit, however, was a different story. Karen's lawyer, emboldened by his client's rage, proceeded with the claim. David, Sarah's lawyer, called her. "They're not backing down. They're claiming emotional distress, on top of the negligence charge. They're saying you traumatized the boy with your yelling and then with your public display." "Public display?" Sarah scoffed, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. "I was filling in a hole." "They're framing it as a violent, unhinged act," David explained, his voice sounding tired. "We have a chance to beat this, but it's going to be expensive and messy. They're going to go after your character." And they did. The first deposition was a brutal affair. Karen's lawyer, a slick, aggressive man named Mr. Thompson, painted a picture of Sarah as a bitter, antisocial recluse. He brought up her husband's death, asking invasive questions about her mental state, her grief, and her unhealthy isolation. "Isn't it true, Ms. Reed," he said, his voice a condescending drawl, "that you were a woman consumed by anger? That you resented the happy family next door? That you felt that they, with their laughter and their children, were a living reminder of what you had lost?" Sarah, coached by David to remain calm, took a slow, deep breath. "No, I was a woman who wanted peace and quiet in her own home. I was a woman who was mourning her husband and wanted a place of sanctuary. I was a woman whose boundaries were repeatedly disrespected." Mr. Thompson just smiled, a thin, knowing expression. "And yet, you pushed a child." "I did not push a child," Sarah said, her voice rising in defiance. "He slipped. I was yelling at him to get out of the pool, a pool he was not supposed to be in. But I did not push him. I am a registered nurse. My first instinct is to help, not to harm." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "But the boy says you pushed him." "He was in shock," Sarah shot back. "He was scared. Children's memories, especially of a traumatic event, are not always reliable. You know this." But Mr. Thompson was not interested in the truth. He was interested in the narrative, and the narrative he was building was a damning one. The real turning point, however, came from an unexpected source. A few days later, a woman from 2 doors down, a quiet, elderly lady named Mrs. Peterson, came to Sarah's door. She was holding a small brown paper bag. "I heard what's been happening," she said, her voice a soft, gentle whisper. "And I wanted to give you this. It's for the police, for your lawyer. It's evidence." Sarah, confused, opened the bag. Inside was a small USB drive. "What is this?" "It's a security camera feed," Mrs. Peterson explained. "I have a camera on my back porch that records everything. I installed it after my garden gnome was stolen last year. It has a view of both your yard and Karen's." Sarah's heart began to beat faster. "You mean it recorded everything? The day of the accident?" Mrs. Peterson nodded. "It did. It's all there. You yelling at the boys, the boy on the diving board, and then him slipping. You didn't push him, dear. Not at all." She paused, a look of profound sorrow on her face. "It also recorded what happened right after. How Karen was on her phone, and how she only ran over when she saw you with her son. It has audio, too. You can hear her screams, her lies." A wave of overwhelming emotion crashed over Sarah. Relief, gratitude, and a cold, hard resolve. The truth, the one thing she had held on to, was now tangible. It was a video file, a piece of irrefutable evidence. That night, she sat with David watching the footage on a laptop. The screen flickered to life, showing the familiar scene. Sarah's garden, the bright sun, the pool. They watched as the boys entered the pool, as Sarah came out and yelled at them as Karen sat, oblivious, on her own patio. And then they watched the boy on the diving board, his wobbly legs, his frightened face. They watched him fall. He didn't fall because of a push. He fell because he lost his balance. And they watched as Sarah, the trauma nurse, vaulted the fence and ran to his aid. They watched as Karen, her face a mask of furious indignation, shoved Sarah aside. And they watched her mouth the words, "You pushed him." The video was a silent, damning indictment of everything Karen had done. It was the truth, undeniable and unforgiving. David sat back in his chair, a wide, triumphant grin on his face. "We've got her. We've got her, Sarah. Not just the lawsuit. We've got her for slander, for filing a false police report, for everything." He laughed, a sound of pure relief. "This is the kind of evidence lawyers dream of." But Sarah's face was grim. She was watching the final few seconds of the video. The part where Karen stood over her unconscious son, not as a panicked mother, but as a woman who saw an opportunity. A woman who was already plotting. Sarah knew in that moment that this was about more than a lawsuit. It was about a deep-seated pathology, a willingness to sacrifice everything, even her own son's well-being, for the sake of a narrative. This was a monster she was dealing with. And the video, the undeniable truth, was not going to be enough. It was a weapon, yes. But she knew deep in her gut that Karen wasn't going to just give up. She was going to fight back. And Sarah was ready. This was not the end. It was the beginning of the final act. A pristine backyard. The sun glints off the turquoise water of a swimming pool. A woman, Karen, stands at the edge, her face a mask of entitlement. Across from her, another woman, Sarah, holds a sledgehammer, its head glistening with a dark, wet sheen. The sound of a siren wails in the distance, growing louder. The camera zooms in on Sarah's determined eyes, then pans to the gaping, jagged hole where the pool's drain used to be. Water, stained with a mix of concrete dust and something darker, gushes out, turning the vibrant green lawn into a muddy, churning wasteland. The air in the conference room was thick with a tense, oppressive silence. Across the polished mahogany table, Karen's lawyer, Mr. Thompson, had just finished a smug recitation of his client's claim, his voice dripping with condescension. He looked at Sarah and her lawyer, David, with the practiced arrogance of a man who believed he had already won. David just smiled. "Thank you for that, Mr. Thompson. A fascinating narrative. We, on the other hand, have something a little more concrete." He nodded to the paralegal, who dimmed the lights and a large screen flickered to life. The first few seconds were a blur of grainy footage from a backyard security camera. Then, the picture resolved. It was Sarah's yard, a perfect, sun-drenched tableau. The date and time stamp were clear, a stark and unforgiving witness to the past. The video played. They all watched in absolute silence. Mr. Thompson, who had been leaning back in his chair with a bored expression, sat bolt upright. He watched as the two boys entered the pool. He watched as Sarah came out and, indeed, yelled at them. He watched as Karen, just yards away, scrolled serenely on her phone, a perfect picture of blissful ignorance. And then, he watched the boy, wobbling on the diving board, lose his footing. He didn't fall because of a shove. He fell because of physics. He fell, and he hit his head. The camera, with its sharp audio, captured Sarah's desperate cry and her frantic dash to the boys' side. It captured the sounds of her expertly checking his vitals, her voice steady and professional. And then, the door of Karen's house burst open. Karen, still with her headphones around her neck, ran over, her face a mask of furious accusation. The audio was clear and damning, a sharp, piercing sound that filled the room. "You pushed him! I saw you!" When the video ended, the lights came back on. The silence was heavier than before, a suffocating blanket of shattered lies. Mr. Thompson, his face ashen, stared at the screen, his mouth slightly ajar. His confident bluster had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow shell of a man who had just watched his case and his reputation turn to dust. "What? What is this?" he stammered, his eyes darting from Sarah to David. "It's a security camera. Feed from our neighbor, Mrs. Peterson," David said, his voice now a weapon. "It's the truth, Mr. Thompson. It's what actually happened. And it proves, without a shadow of a doubt, that your client's claims of negligence and assault are a complete fabrication. It also proves that she filed a false police report and that she has willfully and maliciously slandered my client in both public forums and legal proceedings." Mr. Thompson looked at Karen, who had been sitting next to him, her face a grotesque mixture of shock and denial. She was shaking her head, her lips moving in a silent, desperate negation. She couldn't believe her perfect, airtight story had been so thoroughly, so irrefutably dismantled. This is just a video," Karen whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's been tampered with. It's not real." David just smiled. "Mrs. Peterson's hard drive has already been submitted to the authorities, Karen, and a copy has been sent to the police department, along with a formal request to investigate your false claims and the harassment campaign you waged against my client. This is not just a video, it's the end of your lawsuit, and it's the beginning of a whole new set of problems for you." The rest of the meeting was a blur of legal maneuvering and humiliating retreat. Mr. Thompson, now a desperate man, tried to negotiate, to find some way to salvage the situation. But there was no salvage. The evidence was absolute. He had to drop the lawsuit, and a separate investigation into Karen's actions was now inevitable. The final humiliation came when he had to formally apologize to Sarah, a bitter pill he had to swallow in front of his ruined client. The news of Karen's downfall spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The same social media group she had used to brand Sarah as a monster now turned on her with a savage, righteous fury. The video, released with a formal statement from David, went viral, a cautionary tale about entitlement and malicious lies. The neighbors who had once called for Sarah's arrest now sent her cards and baked goods, a clumsy, belated apology for their rush to judgment. Sarah, however, felt no joy. The victory was hollow. The legal battle was over, but the emotional scars remained. Her job was gone. Her peaceful sanctuary had been destroyed. And in the process, she had come to a chilling realization. The world was not always a fair place, and some people would go to unimaginable lengths to protect their own self-serving narratives. The final act of her saga was a quiet, private one. She spent the next several months, with the help of a small team of contractors, transforming her backyard. The gaping pit that had once been the pool, the physical manifestation of all her strife, was filled in with fresh, rich soil. She had the concrete removed and replaced with a beautiful, sprawling patio. Where the diving board had once stood, she planted a small, delicate Japanese maple tree, a symbol of resilience and new beginnings. One afternoon, as she was spreading mulch, around the tree, she heard a sound from the other side of the fence. Karen's house was silent. A moving truck was parked in the driveway. She watched as movers, with quiet efficiency, loaded boxes and furniture into the back. Karen's husband stood in the driveway, his head in his hands, looking not at his departing home, but at the ground. Karen herself was a shadow of her former self. The carefully constructed image of the perfect mother had crumbled. She looked disheveled, her eyes hollow, the entitlement in her posture replaced by a defeated slump. As she got into the passenger seat of the car, she didn't look at Sarah, didn't look at her old house, didn't look at anything. She was just gone. Sarah watched them drive away, the car disappearing around the corner. She stood in her backyard, the sun warm on her face. The yard was no longer a place of conflict. It was a place of healing. She looked at the small Japanese, maple, its delicate leaves of vibrant green. It had taken a lot of hard work, a lot of anger, and a lot of pain to get here. But standing there, in the quiet solitude of her new sanctuary, Sarah finally felt a sense of profound and lasting peace. The pool was gone, and with it all the ghosts of her past, replaced now by a space that was entirely and finally her own.